The federal government is recommitting its effort to bring clean drinking water to Indigenous communities across the country. The Liberals promised to lift all long-term boil water advisories on reserves by next March. But today, the minister confirmed they won't meet that target.
The Prime Minister wrote in my mandate letter that I needed to get it done. And that is what I stand in front of Canadians today and say, we will get clean water to Indigenous communities thanks to this new investment. Noting at the same time that the spring 2021 deadline, there will be roughly a dozen communities for varying reasons that will not be in a position to lift their long-term water advisory. This is a recommitment to them and a commitment to all the communities that have lifted the water advisories, that we will be with them for the long term in ensuring that those advisories that they have lifted they don't have to go into short-term or long-term advisories, and that the people that are turning on their taps get clean water. And that is my responsibility in this, and it's my responsibility to get it done.
The CBC's Janice McGregor is tracking the story and joins us now live from Ottawa. So Janice, we got some new information from the minister about the progress they are making. What are we learning?
Yeah, so even though they aren't making the deadline that they set for themselves, which is to have all these advisories lifted by the end of 2021, 5 years roughly, from the time the Liberals were elected to government. They have actually made more progress than the data that they had shared publicly, and that is posted on the website until now. Miller told us at this news conference that he suspects they will be announcing another 20 advisories are lifted sometime in December. And they are hoping that as they get into the spring, close to that March deadline, they might be down to only about a dozen that are left if all goes well. Now, he said, of those dozen, some of them are directly attributable to COVID. The fact that they haven't been able to get visitors into these communities, it hasn't been safe to do so. They have had issues, lost a construction season, frankly, with not being able to bring in crews and experts and consultants and the sort of technical professionals that you would need to do if you are building new facilities and new infrastructure. But at the same time, he said, the other half, it's not necessarily attributable to COVID. And that was part of the accountability, I think, that the minister was trying to convey in his remarks today. He said, there were other situations that arose. In some cases, the First Nations made it really clear that this was the government's deadline, not theirs. And as they tried to work together as partners on this, they rejected some of the interim solutions that the government proposed. They wanted things done a different way. That was turning out to take a longer period of time. And as a result, in some of these situations, they aren't going to be ready to lift on what was the government's timeline. And Miller, I think, learned some lessons maybe from that. You now hear him using language about how they can't be dictated by deadlines. He isn't putting a new marker down about when they might be able to finish the job for these last dozen or so communities. But here's a little bit more about what Miller said on that.
This was an ambitious deadline from the get-go. When we say that it was an Ottawa imposed deadline, or it was a deadline we set, those communities weren't sounded to say what time was reasonable, nor was their planning done. Over the last 4 or 5 years, we've been working in communities to lift those diligently, as you've seen.
So two-way street, Miller really saying in terms of finishing this work, but wanting to make it clear that this isn't a case of the government kind of storming in, getting something done and bailing, that this is a long-term project, even in the places where they do now have water treatment facilities up and running.
Now, the feds are putting up new money to get this work done. How much are we talking about here?
So Monday's economic statement had about $1.5 billion available. This is in addition to a fairly sizable budget that had already been allocated for water treatment in First Nations. $2.19 billion was already laid out. They've spent about 3/4 of that already, although the parliamentary budget officer looked at that number a few years ago and said it was nowhere near what was going to be required. This new money maybe gets some kind of closer to a realistic total for what it's going to take to deal with this on the long term. But again, there are multiple things they need to do here. Not only kind of building the treatment facilities in the first place, which, as you heard Miller say, in some cases now are very state-of-the-art facilities that they're trying to do things for the long haul, not cheap solutions. But they also have to train people, local people, give them expertise to maintain it. That is one piece that is a longer term expense and requires real investment, not only in kind of things, but people. They also have to make sure the rest of the infrastructure in the community, the water and wastewater, literally like the pipes, the connections, are all in good shape as well. Because if you have leaks, it doesn't matter how great your water treatment plant is. And finally, there's an acknowledgement, I think, with this new money that, like any construction project, if you've been involved in this work, when you have delays for COVID reasons or otherwise, your budget is blown. And so they are going to be facing some extra costs finishing these final projects just because of kind of losing the last 8 or 9 months in some of these places.